The uneasy Trucivirelli's prime hung in the quiet dark of space like a forgotten stone. Its surface was mostly gray rock and thin, bitter air, but deep in its valleys humans had built a home. They called it Haven Ridge. It was not grand or gleaming like the cities of the Galactic Concordance species. It was rough, patched together with scrap metal, old shipping containers, and stubborn hope. The people there did not wear uniforms or carry titles. They were miners, medics, engineers, and farmers. They worked hard, spoke little, and trusted even less. Among them was Carl Dawson. He was tall, with sun-weathered skin and hands that knew every bolt and wire in the settlement's power grid. He didn't talk much about Earth, but everyone knew he'd grown up in the Badlands of Nevada, where water was worth more than gold, and snakes didn't give warnings before they struck. That kind of past shaped a person. It made them watchful. It made them ready. Lena Ruiz worked in the medical bay, a converted cargo module with flickering lights and a humming air filter. She had grown up in Puerto Rico, where hurricanes taught her to prepare for the worst and still smile through it. She patched up broken bones, treated dust fever, and once stitched up a man who'd been gored by a feral rock hog that had escaped the biopens. She never panicked. Not once. Life on Virelli's prime was hard but predictable, until the day the Kethar patrol vanished. The Kethar were an insectoid species, six-limbed and chitinous with compound eyes that saw in ultraviolet and minds that valued order above all else. They were part of the Galactic Concordance, the alliance that kept peace across 200 worlds. Humans were also members, but barely. They were tolerated, not welcomed. Other species called them Deathworlders behind their backs, a nickname born from old reports of Earth's violent history. Wars, plagues, predators, and disasters that would have wiped out any other young species. Yet humans survived. They thrived, and that scared everyone. The missing Kethar patrol had last been seen near Sector 7, just outside Haven Ridge's mining zone. Their comms went silent. No distress call. No wreckage, just gone. Within hours, a Kethar envoy arrived in a sleek black skiff that hovered over the settlement like a waiting vulture. Through a translator, it demanded answers. Carl stood at the gate, arms crossed. "We didn't see them," he said. "Our sensors picked up a blip, but it vanished before we could ID it." "Your sensors are primitive," the envoy clicked. "You lie to protect your kind." Lena stepped forward, calm but firm. "We have no reason to attack. We're barely surviving out here. Why would we start a war?" The envoy didn't answer. It just turned and left, its skiff vanishing into the red-orange sky. That night, over a shared meal of rehydrated stew and stale bread, the colonists gathered in the mess hall. Voices were low, tense. "They're going to blame us," said Owen Briggs, a young pilot who flew supply runs on a beat-up shuttle named Rusty. "They always do." "Maybe they found something out there," murmured Mara Finch, the colony's only biologist. She'd been studying the strange fungi that grew in the deep caves, something that doesn't want to be found. Carl didn't say much. He stared at his plate, thinking. Earlier that week, a seismic tremor had rattled the eastern ridge. Not big but odd, too regular like a pulse. He'd sent a drone down to check. It never came back. The feed cut out after showing smooth, glassy walls deep underground. Not natural. Not human. 3 days later, the Galactic Concordance sent a message. It was formal, cold, and broadcast on every channel. Human colony Virelli's Prime is under investigation for hostile action against a Kethar peacekeeping unit. All movement is restricted, all communications monitored. Cooperate fully or face consequences. Consequences. The word hung in the air like smoke. Lena checked her medkit twice that night. Owen ran diagnostics on Rusty's engines. Mara reviewed her cave scans again and again. Carl walked the perimeter alone, his boots crunching on the dry gravel, his eyes scanning the horizon. Then, on the 5th night, it happened. A low hum filled the air, growing louder, deeper. The ground trembled. Not a quake this time, but something rising. From the eastern ridge where the drone had vanished, a soft blue light began to glow. It pulsed slow and steady like a heartbeat. Carl ran toward it, calling for backup. When he reached the edge of the crater, he saw it. A smooth black spire had broken through the rock. At its center was a crystal, glowing with that same blue light. It was warm to the touch, though it shouldn't have been, and when Carl got close, it reacted. The light brightened. A low tone vibrated through his bones. Mara arrived minutes later, breathless. She held up her scanner. "It's emitting a bioresonant frequency. I've never seen anything like it. It's alive in a way. Is it dangerous? Carl asked. I don't know, she admitted. But it's responding to us. Specifically, to human DNA. Back at Haven Ridge, the comms lit up. The Cathar were demanding immediate access to the site. The Concordance declared it a potential weapon of mass disruption. They ordered the humans to stand down and surrender the artifact. But Carl looked at the crystal, then at the faces of his people, tired, scared, but unbroken. He thought of Earth, of deserts and jungles and oceans that had tried to kill his ancestors every day. Humans didn't survive by waiting for permission. They survived by acting. We're not handing it over, he said quietly. Lena nodded. Whatever this is, it's ours now. Owen grinned, though his hands shook. Let them come. Far above, in orbit, Cathar ships powered up their weapons. The Concordance watched, silent. The rules of engagement were clear. No first strikes. No escalation. Play fair. But down on Virelli's prime, the humans knew something the others had forgotten. On a death world, fairness was a luxury. Survival was the only rule that mattered. And the crystal pulsed again as if it agreed. The first strike, the Cathar dreadnought hung in orbit like a black claw. It was massive, armored in layered carapace plating bristling with plasma cannons and sensor arrays. To the humans of Haven Ridge, it was a shadow that blotted out the stars. They had no ships to match it. No shields, no long-range weapons. All they had were drills, welders, old mining charges, and the will to live. The attack came without warning. No final demand, no countdown. Just a flash of light as the dreadnought's main cannon fired. A beam of superheated plasma screamed down from the sky and struck the eastern ridge. Rock vaporized. The ground shook, the air filled with dust and fire. But the humans were already moving. Carl Dawson had expected this. He'd spent the last 2 nights wiring the settlement with emergency protocols. When the first tremor hit, alarms blared and everyone knew what to do. Miners sealed the tunnels. Medics dragged the injured underground. Pilots like Owen Briggs scrambled to their shuttles, not to flee, but to fight. The crystal spire still pulsed in the crater, untouched by the blast. Mara Finch stood beside it, her scanner in hand, eyes wide. It's shielding itself, she whispered. And it's helping us. The energy field is spreading. Sure enough, a faint blue shimmer now covered the central part of Haven Ridge. It wasn't strong enough to stop a direct hit, but it bent sensor beams and scattered targeting locks. The Cathar couldn't get a clean shot. On the dreadnought, confusion spread through the command chamber. The Cathar commander, a high-caste officer named Zekthar, clicked his mandibles in frustration. Why do their defenses hold? Their tech is primitive. They are using the artifact, replied his second. It reacts to their biology. It is amplifying them. Then we crush them faster, Zekthar ordered. Deploy ground drones. Burn the settlement to ash. Dozens of spider-like drones dropped from the ship's belly, landing on the surface with sharp metallic legs. They moved fast, scanning for heat signatures, cutting through doors, firing stun pellets that could drop a rhino. But the humans were ready. Lena Ruiz wasn't just a medic. She'd grown up playing in the ruins of old San Juan, learning how to hide, how to move quiet. Now she led a team through the ventilation shafts, dropping flash charges behind enemy lines. The drones spun, disoriented, and Carl's crew ambushed them with magnetized rail spikes fired from jury-rigged launchers. The spikes stuck to the drones' joints, shorting their circuits. One by one, they fell. Owen took Rusty up in a suicide run. The shuttle was old, slow, and unarmed, except for what they'd added. In the cargo bay, they'd strapped mining charges to repurposed coolant tanks. It wasn't a bomb. It was a cloud. He flew low, skimming the canyon walls, drawing fire. The dreadnought tracked him, but the crystal's field made its targeting glitch. Just as the main cannon charged again, Owen dumped the tanks. A thick freezing mist exploded into the air. It wasn't toxic, but it was laced with conductive particles. The mist drifted upward, caught in the dreadnought's intake vents. Inside the ship, alarms shrieked. Systems shorted. Lights flickered. For 3 critical seconds, the dreadnought was blind. That was all Carl needed. Deep in the mines, he'd found something the Cathar didn't know about. An old seismic charge meant for cracking open ore veins. It was powerful enough to shake a mountain. He'd rewired it, synced it to the crystal's frequency, and buried it under the dreadnought's projected landing zone. Now, he said into his comm. Mara triggered the charge. The ground didn't just shake, it erupted. A column of superheated rock and energy shot skyward, not from an explosion, but from the crystal itself. It had absorbed the charge's energy and redirected it. Focused like a spear, the beam struck the dreadnought's underbelly, punching through armor that had withstood asteroid impacts. The ship groaned. Fire bloomed along its hull. It listed sideways, engines sputtering. On the surface, humans watched in silence as the great warship began to fall. It didn't crash. It tumbled, broken into the far desert where it lay like a dead beast. Silence returned to Virelli's prime, but the victory felt hollow. In the aftermath, Mara found something in the drone wreckage, a data chip still active. She plugged it into her pad and her blood ran cold. It contained a fake transmission, recorded in human voices using old concordance archives, showing Carl Dawson ordering an attack on the Cathar patrol. The audio was flawless. The timing matched. It looked real. "Someone set us up," she said, voice tight. Lena joined her, wiping soot from her face. "Who would do that?" "Someone who wants us at war," Carl said, stepping into the room. "Someone who thinks the concordance is too soft. Or too strong." Owen came in, limping slightly. I scanned the debris from the dreadnought. There's a symbol burned into the hull. Not Cathar, older. I've seen it before in the caves. They all looked at the crystal. It pulsed softly as if listening. That night, Carl gathered the colony. No speeches, just facts. "We didn't start this," he said. "But we finished it. And now everyone will think we're monsters." Lena shook her head. "Let them think. We know the truth." Mara held up the data chip. "This proves we were framed. But who will believe us?" "Maybe no one," Carl admitted. "But we can't wait for them to believe us. We have to survive first." He looked at the crystal again. It glowed brighter when he neared it, as if recognizing him. Mara's scans showed it wasn't just reacting to humans, it was changing them, subtly. Their reflexes were sharper, their pain tolerance higher. Even their dreams were filled with strange images. Forests of black stone, skies with 3 suns and a voice that wasn't a voice. Just a feeling. Prepare. The next morning, a concordance message arrived. It was brief. Human colony Virelli's Prime is declared non-compliant. All human worlds are placed under quarantine. Further aggression will be met with total force. Carl read it aloud to the group. No one panicked. No one cried. They just nodded. Owen checked his shuttle's fuel. Lena restocked her medkit with painkillers and antiseptics. Mara began mapping the cave system, searching for more spires. They knew what was coming. The Cathar wouldn't be the only ones. Other species would join the hunt. The concordance would send fleets, diplomats, spies. They would call humans savages, terrorists, Deathworlders who couldn't be trusted with peace. But down in the dust and rock of Virelli's Prime, the humans didn't care about names. They cared about survival. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't just surviving. They were waking up. The crystal pulsed again, steady and strong, and somewhere deep underground, another spire began to rise. The silence of the concordance after the dreadnought fell. The galaxy went quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. No messages, no patrols, no trade ships. The concordance cut all links to human space. Comms went dark. Supply routes vanished. Even the neutral data relays stopped carrying human signals. It was as if humanity had been erased from the star charts. On Virelli's Prime, the colonists felt the silence like a weight. They rationed food, recycled water, and kept watch on the skies. But no new ships came. Not Cathar, not allies, not even scavengers. It was as if the rest of the galaxy had agreed, without saying a word, that humans were no longer worth talking to. Carl Dawson stood on the ridge each morning looking up. He didn't expect rescue. He expected judgment, and he knew it was coming. Meanwhile, far from the frontier, on the glittering orbital hub of Cygnus Central, Eli Vance sat alone in a dim room. He was one of the few humans allowed to serve as a liaison to the Concordance Council. He wore a plain gray suit, spoke 6 alien languages, and had spent 10 years trying to make other species understand that humans weren't monsters, just different. Now, no one would meet with him. His access codes were revoked. His office was sealed. Even his old friends among the avian Zenth or the amphibious Maul wouldn't answer his calls. When he walked the halls, others stepped aside, eyes averted. Whispers followed him like shadows. Deathworlder, warmonger, liar. He tried one last time. He stood outside the grand chamber of the High Council and requested an audience. The door guard, a tall reptilian from the Solar Collective, shook his head slowly. The council has ruled. Humanity is under sanction. Your presence is not permitted. I have proof we were framed, Eli said, holding up a data chip, the same kind Mara had found. This shows the Cathar transmission was faked. Someone manipulated both sides. The guard didn't take it. Proof means nothing when trust is gone. Eli walked away, heart heavy. He knew then that reason wouldn't save his people, only action would. Back on Varelli's prime, the changes were getting harder to ignore. Lena Ruiz noticed it first in the infirmary. A miner broke his leg in a cave-in. Normally it would take weeks to heal, but within days, the bone was knitting faster than any scanner could explain. The man felt no pain, just a strange warmth in his limbs. Owen Briggs crashed Rusty during a test flight. The impact should have killed him. Instead, he walked away with bruises and a cracked rib that sealed itself by morning. Carl felt it too. His reflexes were sharper. His mind clearer. He could hear whispers in the wind that weren't there before. And when he stood near the crystal, he saw flashes. Images of ancient battles of humans fighting not with guns but with teeth and claws and fire. It wasn't memory. It was instinct, buried deep in their genes now waking up. Mara called it adaptive resonance. The crystal wasn't just a tool. It was a key. It unlocked something inside every human who came near it, a survival program written into their DNA over millions of years on a planet that never stopped trying to kill them. We're not becoming stronger, she told Carl one night. We're remembering how strong we already are. The Council didn't care. They declared humanity a rogue species. They authorized member worlds to use any means necessary to contain the threat. Fleets began to gather at the edges of human space. The Cathar rebuilt. The Maul sent war subs through the gas giants. Even the peaceful Zenth armed their seed ships with sonic lances. Still, no one attacked. Not yet. They were waiting. Watching. Carl knew they couldn't wait. One evening, he gathered everyone in the main hall. No lights, just the soft glow of the crystal's energy seeping through the walls. They think we're hiding, he said. They think we're scared. But we're not. We never were. He looked at Lena, Owen, Mara, and the others, farmers, cooks, mechanics, kids who'd never known a world without danger. We have one choice, he said. We can let them come and burn us out like rats in a hole. Or we can show them what happens when you corner a Deathworlder. No one argued. They'd all felt the change. They'd all seen what they could do, so they made a plan. Not to fight a war, but to end one before it truly began. Carl and Mara worked through the night, sinking the crystal to every human settlement across the sector. It wasn't magic. It was biology. The signal traveled through subspace, carried on the same frequency as human brainwaves. Wherever humans lived, on Mars domes, asteroid outposts, jungle colonies on New Earth, they would feel it. And they would wake up. Lena prepared medical packs not for healing but for endurance. Nutrient gels, neural stimulants, bone knitters. Owen modified every shuttle with stealth coatings made from cave fungi and signal jammers built from old comms gear. And then, Carl did the hardest thing. He activated the beacon. Deep in the crater, the crystal flared. Blue light shot into the sky not as a beam but as a wave. It spread outward, silent and invisible to machines, but loud as thunder in the minds of every human within 100 light years. On a dusty farm in the Perseus Arm, a boy dropped his hoe and looked up, eyes wide with sudden clarity. On a research station orbiting Jupiter, a scientist gasped as her hands moved faster than thought to reroute a failing reactor. In a prison colony on Ceres, inmates stood as one, their bodies humming with a strength they'd never known. The Deathworlders were no longer just surviving. They were ready. And still, the Concordance said nothing. They watched the signal ripple across human space. They saw colonies go dark, not from destruction, but from choice. No comms, no broadcasts, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was the quiet before the storm. Eli Vance, still stranded on Cygnus Central, felt the change too. He didn't have a crystal near him. But the signal reached him anyway, through blood, through bone, through the shared memory of a species that had clawed its way out of the mud and fire of Earth. He stood at his window, looking out at the stars, and smiled for the first time in weeks. They were coming. Not with banners or demands, but with the quiet certainty of those who had nothing left to lose and everything they'd ever been. Finally remembered. The reckoning, the first strike, came not from a fleet, but from a single man in a rusted diving rig. His name was Kyle Marsh, and he lived on Tarnus 7, a water world where the oceans were deep enough to swallow mountains. The Concordance had built a Cathar command hub there, floating on the surface like a metal island, its roots plunging into the abyss. It controlled supply lines, drone patrols, and surveillance for 3 sectors. It was supposed to be untouchable. Kyle wasn't a soldier. He was a diver, hired to repair deep-sea vents for a mining company that no longer existed. But when the beacon pulsed through his bones, he remembered things he'd never learned. How pressure bends metal, how currents carry sound, how creatures in the dark hunt without eyes. He took his old sub, patched its hull with sealant and hope, and slipped beneath the waves. For 3 days, he mapped the hub's support columns. Then, on the 4th night, he planted shaped charges on the geothermal vents below. They weren't bombs. They were triggers. When he detonated them, the ocean itself rose up. Superheated water blasted through the hub's foundations. Metal groaned. Seals burst. The entire structure listed, then sank, dragging its crew into the crushing dark. No shots were fired. No alarms sounded in time. By dawn, the command hub was gone, and Kyle was back in his shack drying his gloves. The Concordance called it sabotage. They didn't know it was just the beginning. On the desert moon of Zorath, where the sand burned by day and froze by night, Norabelle tended a small greenhouse of hardy crops. She'd been a schoolteacher once back on Earth. Now she grew food for a dozen families hiding in canyon caves. When the beacon reached her, she didn't grab a weapon. She studied the sandworms. The worms were native to Zorath, massive, blind, and sensitive to vibration. The Concordance had built an outpost on the Dune Sea, thinking the worms avoided metal. They were wrong. Nora knew the worms followed heat, not sound, and she knew how to mimic the pulse of a dying engine. She buried old power cells in the sand, rigged to cycle on and off like a failing generator. The worms came, dozens of them. They tunneled under the outpost, drawn to the false signal. Then, at just the right moment, Nora triggered a sonic pulse from her greenhouse, a frequency that sent the worms into a frenzy. The ground collapsed. The outpost vanished into the dunes. Not a single human fired a shot. Reports flooded the Concordance channels. Outposts falling. Supply depots going silent. Patrol routes disrupted by natural disasters. But there was nothing natural about it. Humans were using the worlds themselves as weapons. On icy Vestra, a former ice miner rerouted glacial melt to flood a mall listening post. On the jungle moon of Kale, a botanist released spores that made alien armor rust overnight. In the asteroid belt of Helios, a kid named Jesse rigged solar mirrors to blind sensor arrays, then slipped past them in a salvaged cargo pod. The Concordance tried to respond. They sent more ships, more drones, more soldiers, but their tactics were rigid, built on rules that assumed enemies would fight fair. Humans didn't. They fought like Earth had taught them, with cunning, with patience, with whatever was at hand. Carl Dawson led raids not with armies, but with teams of 3 or 4. They'd strike a relay station, fry its core with a jury-rigged EMP made from a microwave and a battery, then vanish into the rocks before backup arrived. Lena Ruiz didn't just heal the wounded. She taught them how to move without pain, how to push past limits that would break others. Owen Briggs flew missions so low and quiet that sensors mistook him for birds or dust storms. Mara Finch stayed on Varelli's Prime, studying the crystal. She discovered it wasn't alone. Similar nodes existed on other worlds, buried deep, waiting, and they were all connected. When one pulsed, the others answered. The Concordance finally realized the truth. This wasn't rebellion. It was adaptation. And they were losing. Their fleets orbited human worlds, but no one landed. They feared what waited below. Not guns, but traps, poisons, terrain turned against them. Their drones failed in forests, deserts, oceans, places humans knew like their own skin. Even their spies failed. A Zenth agent, disguised as a traitor, tried to infiltrate Haven Ridge. He lasted 6 hours before a child pointed at him and said, "He smells wrong." The humans didn't kill him. They just locked him in a room with no light, no sound, and let his own mind break. Eli Vance watched it all from Cygnus Central. He saw the panic in the council chambers, the hushed arguments, the growing fear. Species that had never feared anything now whispered about the Deathworld plague. But Eli knew better. This wasn't plague. It was awakening. One night he received a message, not through official channels, but through an old emergency frequency. It was short, just 3 words. "We remember Earth." He smiled. The final blow came not from violence, but from truth. Mara had spent weeks decoding the crystal signal. It wasn't just biological. It carried data, ancient, vast, and clear. It showed images of a long-dead race, tall and silver-eyed, who had seeded the galaxy with these nodes. They weren't weapons. They were tests, each node activated only when a species faced extinction-level pressure. If they used it to dominate, they failed. If they used it to protect, they passed. Humanity had passed. Eli leaked the data, not to the council but to every public feed, every news net, every school and market and home across the concordance. The truth spread like fire. Humans weren't monsters. They were survivors who chose mercy over conquest. They could have burned the concordance to ash. Instead, they showed them how to see. The fleet stopped moving. The orders ceased. And for the first time in months, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of questions. A new understanding. The silence after the truth spread was different. It wasn't the cold quiet of fear or the heavy hush of waiting for war. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone stops shouting and finally listens. On Cygnus Central, the grand chamber of the Galactic Concordance filled slowly, not with soldiers or enforcers, but with diplomats, scholars, and elders from every member species. They came not in armor, but in robes, in shells, and woven light suits. They came because they had no choice. The data was real. The images were clear. And the humans, those strange, fierce, unpredictable Deathworlders, had not used their power to destroy. They had used it to reveal. Eli Vance stood at the center of the room. He wore no badge, no rank, just the same gray suit he'd worn for years. But now when he spoke, they listened. "We didn't ask for this fight," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You called us monsters because we survived differently. But survival isn't evil. It's life." He showed them more. Not just the ancient test, but footage from Varelli's prime. Humans saving wounded Cathar drones instead of crushing them. Sharing water with stranded mall scouts, burying their own dead while protecting alien artifacts. "We don't want to rule you," Eli said. "We just want to exist. And if you'll let us, we'll help you see the galaxy not as a place to control, but as a place to understand." The council was shaken. The Cathar representative, a new envoy named Vrel Keek, stepped forward. "You broke our ship. You killed our soldiers. You attacked us first," Eli replied. "But we didn't hunt your families. We didn't poison your worlds. We fought to stop the war, not win it." Vrel Keek was silent for a long time. Then, in a gesture no one expected, he lowered his front limbs, a Cathar sign of respect. On Varelli's prime, Carl Dawson watched the broadcast on a cracked screen in the mess hall. Lena sat beside him, mending a torn jacket. Owen leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his eyes were soft. Mara stood by the door, arms full of data pads, but she paused to listen. When Eli finished speaking, Carl didn't cheer. He just nodded. That was enough. The Concordance didn't apologize. They didn't offer medals or treaties right away, but they lifted the quarantine. They recalled their fleets, and they sent a single ship, not a warship but a science vessel, to Varelli's prime. It carried no weapons. Only scientists, medics, and one old Zenth philosopher who wanted to see the crystal with his own eyes. Carl met them at the ridge. No guards, no guns. Just him, Lena, and a pot of real coffee, brewed from beans they'd saved for a special day. The Zenth elder, his skin shimmering like riverstone, looked at the crystal spire. "It sings," he whispered. "Only to those who listen," Mara said. They talked for hours. About Earth, about the test, about what fairness really meant. The Zenth admitted their own history was full of wars masked as peace. The Maul envoy confessed they'd feared humans because they reminded them of their own violent past. Carl listened. He didn't lecture. He just told stories. Of kids playing in dust storms, of farmers growing food in poisoned soil, of people helping strangers because it was the right thing to do. That night, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, humans and aliens shared a meal. No grand speeches. No promises carved in stone. Just food, quiet talk, and the hum of the crystal in the distance. In the weeks that followed, changes came slow. Human colonies were no longer watched like prisoners. Trade resumed, not as charity but as exchange. Human engineers helped repair Cathar ships. Maul doctors learned human pain tolerance techniques. Zenth poets wrote songs about Deathworlders who chose mercy. But the biggest change was in how the galaxy saw itself. The old rules of engagement were rewritten, not to limit the strong but to protect the vulnerable, not to pretend all species were the same, but to honor their differences. The Concordance added a new clause. No species shall be judged by its past, but by its choices in the present. And every school, on every world, began to teach the story of Virelli's Prime. Not as a war, but as a turning point. They called it the day Deathworlders stopped playing fair. Because fairness, they learned, wasn't about equal weapons or balanced rules. It was about truth, about seeing others not as threats but as fellow travelers in a dangerous universe. Back on Earth, in a small town in Nevada, an old man sat on a porch watching the sunset. He'd never left the planet, but he'd heard the news. His grandson asked, "Are we still monsters?" The old man smiled. "No, we're just human, and that's enough." On Virelli's Prime, Carl stood once more on the ridge. The crystal still pulsed, but softer now, like a lullaby. Lena joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "What now?" she asked. "We keep living," he said, "and we keep remembering." Far above, a human shuttle passed through the clouds, heading out to help a stranded freighter from a species that once called them savages. The galaxy was still vast, still dangerous, but for the first time it felt a little less lonely, and every species remembered. When the Deathworlders stopped playing fair, they didn't bring war, they brought understanding.